There comes a time, somewhere after 50, when you realize home isn't just about where you live. It's about how you live. It's about who you're becoming and what you're ready to make space for. I'm Juli Ford, real estate expert and longtime wellness coach, and someone who's lived in a multi-generational home for the past decade while reinventing my life and my business. And this is Home After 50, a podcast about what it really means to find, shape, and come home to a new season, to a new home, to a new version of yourself. Whether you're thinking about upsizing, downsizing, moving in with family, or just asking bigger questions about what's next, you're in the right place. Each episode, I will share stories, insights, and real strategies for women redefining home and life on their own terms. Because after 50, home isn't just a place, it's a calling. And this time, it's yours. We used to think life after 50 meant downsizing, but what if that's changing? I mentioned in a recent episode that I've had several reels on social media go viral talking about multi-generational living and also challenging the idea of downsizing and asking the question, what if downsizing isn't your next chapter? What if it's creating a home with room for everyone that you love? And the comments that I received on that reel really surprised me. So I'm going to get into it in this episode and talk about this idea of Gen X upsizing, not downsizing, and why that is, and how we may be, as Gen Xers, particularly well cut out for the upsizing stage of life. The data on multi-generational households is so interesting. So you all know by now that I started talking about this because I've lived in a multi-gen home for the past 10 years. And it's something that's worked really well for our family on a personal level and also on a financial level. And the information out there now about the number of multi-generational households there are in the United States is really kind of remarkable. So as of 2024, 18% of U.S. households live in multi-generational homes. That's about 60 million Americans. But what I found really remarkable about that information, and if you're watching me on YouTube for this episode, you're going to notice I'm probably glancing off camera a little more than I normally do because I actually have data this time that I really want to share with you. So I'm glancing at my second screen here so that I give you the right information. 15 years ago, in 2010, only 4% of U.S. households were multi-gen households. And just 15 years later, 18% of Americans were living in multi-gen households. That's a dramatic increase in a short period of time. And in 2024, 17% of home buyers were purchasing multi-gen homes, the highest share ever recorded. And among Gen X buyers, so people in their late 40s and late 50s, 21% are buying multi-gen homes right now. So that is data that I was able to find for you, get resources for online. But something that I haven't been able to find data on yet is something that I'm observing in stories and comments that people are sharing with me. And it aligns with that data. And this is this idea that there are a growing number of people over 50 who regret downsizing and are now considering upsizing. So I'm going to read you a few comments that came up on one of my viral reels about not downsizing. And by the way, when I say this sort of statement that what if downsizing isn't the way to go, I also get a lot of pushback from people who think that downsizing is great. And I just want to acknowledge that, of course, for some people it is. But what I'm noting is a growing trend of people who are rejecting that idea or finding it doesn't work for them. And my own personal experience. So take with this what you will. It is a growing trend, but maybe it's not for you, but maybe it is. And it is for a lot of people these days. So Someone on one of these reels commented, I regret downsizing. Now I need to upsize a bit as our family has grown and I'm feeling tight. Someone else shared, I have just been thinking about this. We've been in our house 20 years, but I think it's time to expand. Even as the kids are getting older and will leave, I want them to come back. Another comment, oh my gosh, we bought into the downsizing story and then the kids all got married and now have grandkids. And now we're rethinking why we downsized in the first place. We're looking for a separate space for all of us to enjoy together. And someone else commented, selling our large home was the dumbest idea. I thought that was hilarious. And the comments go on and on. So many people are finding that selling their home after their kids leave home. So say, your kids graduate from school, they go off on their own, they're starting their own lives. Maybe they're in their 20s, you're in your 50s or late 40s, and you sell thinking, well, we have too much room now, and maybe we're tired of mowing the lawn and we want something a little easier to manage. And then 10 years later, a lot of families are finding out that the kids are starting families of their own and their family is expanding. And for many reasons, including having aging parents who need extra support and having young adult children who are having a hard time in this economy affording their own home, multi-generational living and having a bigger space can make a lot of sense. There are also a lot of people who just want these larger homes to accommodate occasional visits, to accommodate holidays or sleepovers. A lot of people have family who lives across the country and they fly in and stay for days or weeks at a time and they want the space to host them. So I'm finding it very interesting that this phenomenon of upsizing is really taking off. Last weekend, I hosted an open house at a listing of mine. The sellers of this home had already moved out and they are in their early 80s. So they were very much ready to downsize and move closer to their daughter. What was fascinating to me was we had about 20 groups of potential buyers come through the open house, and at least 6 couples talked to me at that open house and told me their story. And it was the same regret downsizing story that I've been seeing online. Each of these couples had sold their larger home when their kids had initially moved out. Some of them, most of them had bought or rented a townhome or a condo thinking that this was the next stage of their life, only to find out that they wanted the space back to host their families, to visit with their families, or to live with their families. So this is a growing trend. So one thing that this got me thinking about is why? Why is this such a growing trend? We know that we have an aging population. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans are going to be over the age of 65. That's 73 million people. And a lot of older adults really want to stay in familiar environments, but they need their family nearby. A lot of older adults are downsizing and moving to senior living communities, but many are considering combining households with their middle-aged children and really leveraging, this is what we did in our family, leveraging resources to be better financially and relationally for everybody. I don't think my mom would mind me sharing this. I'm not going to get into the deep personal details, but even just this week in our household, my mom had a small health issue going on that required me checking in with her daily and helping her with something. And wow, that would have been so much harder to do if we weren't living in the same space. I would have had to leave my house and go to where she was living, and that would have involved so much more time, whereas just like popping downstairs and being able to help her out with this small task is really useful to both of us. Gen X, people my age, are the sandwich generation. Most of us are caring for aging parents and also have adult kids. And then there's the economic pressure. So millennials are entering into homeownership later and later due to high housing costs, high student debt, and wage stagnation. Probably anyone who has a millennial in their life is not surprised that getting into homeownership has been nearly impossible. Older millennials were graduating college after the housing crisis of 2008 to 2012. And even today's millennials are once again experiencing a crunch, and Gen Z is experiencing this same crunch with rising housing prices over the last 8 to 10 years that are making it really impossible for them to afford to get into home ownership. And this leaves the Gen X parent and adult child in an interesting position of needing to support both their aging parent and their adult child, perhaps even their grandchildren. So, as we're challenging this idea of downsizing in our 50s, and thinking of either remaining in our homes or even moving to a larger home or going back to having a larger home after trying downsizing and finding it wasn't a fit for us, one thing I thought was interesting would be to think about, why are we, as the Gen X generation, perhaps uniquely equipped to take on this new stage of life in a different way than our parents did. Now, of course, if you go back another generation before that or a couple generations before that, living in a multi-generational home was nothing new. Almost everybody did it. And around the world, people still do. But in the United States, it became uncommon for a long time. So here's what I think is really interesting. Gen X isn't just doing multi-gen living. We're perhaps uniquely wired for it. We are natural integrators. We grew up analog and adapted to digital. We're used to holding two things at once: tradition and progress, independence and connection. We have a mindset that makes us ideal for managing multi-generational households. We're blending old values with new dynamics. Many of us were latchkey kids. We learned how to care for ourselves and others early with working parents and a lot of time on our own. And now as adults, we're applying a lot of that resilience and practicality to caring for both our parents and our kids and perhaps our grandkids. We're not scared of complexity. We manage it on the daily. Downsizing used to be seen as a path to freedom, but I think this is an opportunity to redefine what freedom looks like. For many Gen Xers, freedom actually means space. Space for aging parents, space for returning adult kids, for future grandchildren, for family dinners, for remote work zones. And we have more flexibility than previous generations did. A lot of us are still working and plan to be working for decades, but we have the flexibility, so many of us, to work from home on a flexible schedule in a flexible environment. And we're seeing connection not as a burden, but as the whole point. And now we are the hubs of our family. This can, as I mentioned in my last episode, feel burdensome to some. But for a lot of people, and I'm going to include myself in this, it's a new kind of freedom to define what the next years of our lives look like. And let's be real, finances have a lot to do with this. This is even more challenging to accomplish if finances are tight. But if we have financial resources and support, which many of us do at this point in our lives, we can get the help that we need. So I wouldn't be happy doing what I'm doing right now if I couldn't afford a house cleaner once a month. Now, that's a privileged thing to say. I completely acknowledge that. But I'm willing to put it out there that having that kind of support is a factor in making my multi-gen life work for me. Our house is large. I wouldn't want to be cleaning it all by myself. If I didn't have the financial resources to hire a house cleaner, I'd have to be negotiating more with the other adult members of my household to make sure that that burden did not fall on me solely, because I wouldn't be willing to take that on. So let's acknowledge money does have something to do with this. But I also want to share that combining households with my mom 10 years ago was a way that we were able to build more wealth for our family. We weren't paying for two households. We weren't paying for two sets of utility bills. Of course, there's more expenses that come along with a larger home, but they're not double what they were or would have been with two different households. So I think there are creative ways to look at how to fund these things. And certainly if you have adult children living with you that cannot afford to purchase their own home, or you've just decided to combine households because it makes more sense to the family and financially, there have to be agreements there that everyone is contributing in the ways that they can and that feel fair. Because if the burden financially or otherwise falls on just one generation or one person in the household, that's not a recipe for long-term success. So I think that Gen Xers are do-it-yourself enthusiasts, do-it-yourself experts. If we can't figure it out, we Google it. We grew up with our parents honestly not knowing where we were most of the day. That's hard for us to imagine as parents now, where we have our kids on Find My Phones. Even my college kids, I could still see where they were, not because I wanted to track them down all the time, but because we became accustomed to communicating that way and letting everyone know where we were. When I was growing up, I'm sure when many of you were growing up, that wasn't the case. We were on our own figuring things out. I literally remember being 13 years old and taking a bus with my best friend to the town that she had moved to because her mom had been in some financial hard times and had to move away from where we were. And we took the bus to where she was staying for the summer with her mom. And we realized partway through the day that we didn't have bus money to get home. And my mom was at work, my dad was at work, her mom was at work, and we had to figure it out. I remember scrounging for change so that we could find enough money to get home on the bus and back to my house. And I think it took us all day to figure it out. But I don't know that our kids experience things quite the same way as we did back then. It's funny that memory stuck with me, but I think it's because I learned a lot of ingenuity and resilience from things like that. And these are things that have served me well in my life and still do to this day. So I guess in the end, this episode is a little bit of a love letter to Gen X and Gen X women, especially. We are paving a new way of taking care of our families, of living in our homes, of redefining what home and family look like for us in this stage. And I also want to acknowledge that it's not just the moms and the grandmothers who are doing this. There are a lot of Gen X women who are figuring out how to do this with friends. I had a lot of comments on my post about what about those of us who don't have kids? We want to build this kind of community with our sisters or with our lifelong friends. And I absolutely love that. Multi-generational community living is not just for a traditional family structure. It really can be for anyone. I think this idea of pooling resources, every kind of resource, financial, intellectual, talents, skills, and creating the kind of home and life and community that we dream of together, as opposed to being so fiercely independent that we end up feeling far more alone than we ever would have wanted to. It's a beautiful idea. And however you choose to create it, whether that's downsizing, upsizing, multi-generational living with your family, or creating a community of friends, I am here for it. I love to hear your stories. I hope you'll come visit me on Instagram and share your stories with me there, or send me an email at julie@juliford.com. Just remember, no E on Julie. And I read every single one of your stories, and I really look forward to hearing from you and how you're creating home today and what that looks like in perhaps a brand new way. Thanks for being here. Thanks so much for listening to Home After 50. If this episode resonated, I'd love it if you'd come hang out with me on Instagram. I am at It's Juli Ford, ITSJULIFORD. Just remember, no E on Julie. That's where I share ideas and behind the scenes about multi-generational living, real estate, business, and creating a next chapter that you love. And if you're curious about whether multi-generational living might be right for you, you can grab my free guide. It's in the link right in my Instagram bio. It's a simple way to get started imagining what's next. Because after 50, home isn't just a place, it's who we're becoming. See you next time.